was about 10 years ago this month that I learned that I was to become a father for the first time. And when I learned that, as I think is true for many of us when we discover that we are to become parents, for those of us who have in fact become parents, we find ourselves both hopeful, incredibly optimistic, hopefully overjoyed. Hopefully you're excited about that. I was. But at the same time, incredibly nervous and incredibly fearful, because you know that you will now be responsible for another human life. And there's so much that can go wrong in the process of not only bringing a child into this world, but raising that child into a healthy and productive adult. And after our first daughter was born, and since then we have had another daughter, but after the birth of that first child, I remember every time I would look at her, and it's true even now, 9 years after the fact of her birth, that I would look at her with this combination, once again, of hopefulness and utter trepidation. 10 weeks after the birth of our first daughter was when 9/11 happened, and I remember thinking at the time, how in the world am I to ever explain the kinds of inhumanity that human beings, of which she is one, do to others, how that happens and how often it happens, and how often it happens both to us and by us, and how we regularly hurt one another, even as I'm expecting her to grow into this compassionate and caring person. And how do you balance the fear and the trepidation and the horror with the good and the optimism and the hope? How do you maintain optimism in the face of those kinds of terrors that come to all parents at one point or another? And as the 9 years have gone on, I've come to realize that combination of hopefulness and trepidation, that combination of optimism and, frankly, pessimism, even sometimes cynicism, isn't just what parents feel toward their children. It's what, if we are paying attention, we must feel right now at this moment towards our nation and toward the culture in which we find ourselves. I've been out speaking about racism around this country for 16 years, and I've been doing one form or another of anti-racist educating or activism for about 20 years. And in that 20 years, I've had the opportunity to meet incredible people all around the country in 49 different states, literally thousands of folks who are doing amazing work right now to deal with the issues of institutional racism and oppression. I've seen folks of color leading the way. I've seen white folks aspiring to real allyship and sometimes really actually manifesting actual solidarity. And so on the one hand, I'm incredibly optimistic about that. And I'm seeing more of it and more of it as those 10, 15, 20 years have gone by. So that's the good piece. That's the part that corresponds to the excitement that I had upon learning that I was going to become a father. But at the same time, that I can see all of that really good stuff happening, and I can meet all of those thousands of people around the country, and actually in a couple of other countries too, who are so adamant about the need to uproot institutional white supremacy and privilege and racial inequity. I know that there are thousands more, untold thousands more, people who I don't get to meet, people who don't come to my talks, people who are not engaged in the same conversation. They're engaged in a very different one. And their conversation sounds like this. It sounds like, I want my country back. And their conversation sounds different. Their conversation sounds like this. It sounds like, we're going to ban ethnic studies in the state of Arizona. We're going to run those folks out of the state of Arizona, or at least make sure they carry papers with them wherever they go. That's what their conversation sounds like. Their conversation sounds like claiming that the attempt to reform the healthcare system in our country, according to Glenn Beck, is really not about healthcare. It's just about obtaining reparations for slavery. That's their conversation. So while some of us are trying to build a society of racial justice, others are pushing these buttons of white racial resentment every day, every week, every month, every hour, every minute, every waking moment of their lives. Healthcare, think about that, as reparations for slavery. Now that has been said by both Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh. It's been heard by millions of their listeners, not one of whom called in to say, that's the dumbest damn thing I ever heard. So they must believe it. Yet I want you to think about it for a minute. Think about the logic of this. Think about why this would be said. Because on the one hand, it sounds utterly preposterous, right? Makes no sense intellectually to say that healthcare reform is about President Obama trying to get reparations for slavery. I mean, just play along with me. Let's just process for a minute before I get back to the real substance of my remarks this evening. What does it mean that you could even make that claim? I mean, to intellectually believe that that made any sense, you would have to think that black folks were sitting around and one day they went, oh hell yes. I have come up with the plan. I have got a hustle to get that 40 acres and a mule. Do you want to hear it? Do you want to hear it? Do you want to hear it? Yeah. What's your plan? Here it is. Here it is. Get ready. Check it out. Check it out. Check it out. Check it out. Cancer.